Hi, we're Oxygen Conservation, and this is the Shoot Room Sessions. Hey, Cain.
Hi, Rich.
Welcome to the Shoot Room.
Pleasure to be here.
Can you tell those watching and listening who you are and what you do, please?
Yeah, my name's Cain Blythe. I'm CEO of CreditNature and Ecosulis. I spend probably 70% of my time in CreditNature trying to persuade corporates to put their hands in their pockets and invest in nature recovery. And then the other 30% in Ecosulis is supporting our senior leadership team trying to help accelerate rewilding.
Awesome. Can you take us back to the start? Can you take us back to childhood, where you grew up, how you first connected with the environment, and take us through those sort of key chapters that bring you here to today?
Yeah, I think I am a lifelong conservationist. I remember when I was 8 years old, my grandfather, he said, "What do you want to be?" As you know, all fathers and grandfathers and parents do. And I was convinced at the time I wanted to be a zoologist. I didn't even know what it was. Just didn't. Even now, I don't know where I got that idea from, but that's been with me throughout my life. I used to spend more time in the countryside. I loved going out in my dad's fishing boat, and just loved being in the environment all the time. So,
Whereabouts did you grow up?
Poole in Dorset, and yeah, we used to go out in Poole Harbour. It's an amazing place. It was at the time, looking at birds and going fishing. And since then, I've just been obsessed with nature in every aspect of my life. And so I got into do a zoology degree.
Whereabouts?
Southampton.
Any particular reason there as a place?
At the time, it was a course which I think just really resonated, and it kind of followed on quite naturally from some of the work I'd been doing prior to that. I'd volunteered from a very early age at a national bird of prey sanctuary, helping to train falcons and eagles and vultures and all sorts of things. And then I did a little stint at veterinary college as well. And then I also went to work at Jersey Zoo for a little while, did a work experience there. One of my claim to fame actually is I managed to go to a birthday party for Gerald Durrell while I was there. So that was yet another inspiration to try and focus my mind on everything nature, really.
It sounds like your sort of view of the future was very mature at an early age. You know, you had that clear view of career and what you wanted to be.
I think that's true. I think for me, it's more than that. I mean, the connection to nature is just part of who I am. I'm true. It's a little bit cliched. I don't feel like I'm separate to nature. I'm part of nature, and therefore it's just it's natural for me to do.
The way you're sharing it clearly sounds rooted in honesty and experience, so it doesn't sound cliche at all.
Yeah, so doing a zoology degree was really quite straightforward for me to think about. Loved doing that, and then almost immediately after, I did a little bit of work in construction and things like that, but that didn't resonate. I then decided, right, I'm going traveling. Went to Australia, worked in some zoological parks there, worked in the Currumbin Wildlife Sanctuary, looking after parrots and black swans and wallabies, those sorts of things. Came back and did a master's degree, and then immediately sort of started looking for work.
Whereabouts was the master? Was that back at Southampton as well?
That was Sussex University. And then following on from that, I got a job with Jacobs, what's now Jacobs Engineering. It was Sir Alexander Gibbon Partners back in the day. I was one of only two ecologists actually, which is quite interesting because Jacobs is huge in terms of their ecology function. And then I went self-employed for a little while, did some work in Saudi Arabia on a strategic environmental assessment, those sorts of things.
Had you always had that awareness of the potential of being self-employed? So is it kind of an entrepreneurial vein running through the family? Did you know it was how to do it, for example?
I think it was more, so the reason I became self-employed is that I had at that time won a project with with BBOW, Berkshire, Buckinghamshire and Oxfordshire Wildlife Trust, talking decades ago now, and this was to write some management plans. And my boss at the time in Jacobs said, "That's not a priority for us." And I was over the moon to have won this work. And I'm like, "It's a priority for me, so I'm going to take that work on myself and do it that way." And that's kind of the mindset I've got. It's always trying to do as much kind of impact type of work as I possibly can. And so, yeah, it was an easy decision again. I mean, this is the thing.
So many people would call it a brave decision and say, you jump from a big company to flying solo to follow something that you were passionate about and committed to.
Yeah, or stupid. Yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things. But I kind of did that, and immediately my wife was pregnant, and we had.
Did she know you were going to jump solo before you did it?
I can't remember, to be honest, so I don't remember. She's now very used to me just saying, "We're going to do this," and just hanging on for dear life.
Shout out to supportive wives out there. Thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Oh, hugely supportive. Yeah, through many difficult challenges as well. So, and then following on from that, I was headhunted into a smaller consultancy, which is now Ecosulis. It was a family-run business. And then just kind of work my way up to...
What does being headhunted look like for people that are early in their career and don't really understand how business works?
I'm assuming your name must just be known to the recruiters somewhere along the lines. And I was sent an email saying, "I'm representing this particular company and they are looking for someone in this role." It was a sort of field ecologist type of role at the time. It's when I actually knew about how to identify plants and animals and things like that. I wouldn't put me in a field now, but
I'm the same with writing code. So PhD wise, I could turn 1 and 0. Chris is behind the camera smiling at me, knowing I can't code anymore. I used to be able to do that. Now I just have people way cleverer than me to do that, which is wonderful.
Yeah. So they invited me to an interview. Again, I think at that point we had a 9-day-old daughter, and we were based in Reading, and I got the job, but then was commuting sort of 2 hours there and back every day. But it was a great job to get, and then just worked my way through really to become an MD and CEO.
So many people don't realise that everyone thinks the sequencing of, you get the job and everything falls into place in terms of life as well. In my experience, each step of the career, the getting the job or the next business bit was the easy bit. It was making sure the family life, everyone else was healthy, well looked after and in a place. Sequencing all that together is the challenging bit.
Yes, I mean, there were all sorts of real world challenges going on around that. Yeah, there was externally lots of, I had quite a lot of bereavement and things like that through that process. And my wife's got an illness and those sorts of things. And we had to raise our children through recessions and all sorts of things going on. So yeah, I think there's a real kind of aspect to getting to successful places. And
I don't think we talk about that enough. The sort of social media age presents it as, this is really easy and you can fly to the top of your own business and it's a piece of cake. It doesn't show the 18-hour days, the travel to and from the family with them saying, please don't go and come back earlier. And then you're still having to nail the job and deliver that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's many holidays that I went on where I'm saying, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to do some work. I'm gonna have to finish writing this tender. I'm gonna have to just keep going, because if I don't, then maybe the wheels will fall off, and we can't have that, obviously.
How much of it then versus now is the wheels might fall off? And I often get asked, why do I work like I do? My real answer is because I don't know how to not. It's just because it's there. How much of it is it that fear about things might not work out versus it's just who you are?
So there's been a major transition, I think, in my mindset. And so I've gone from the position of worrying about failure, wheels falling off, to just obsessed with the possibility of getting it right. And I think now for me, I'm not so fearful. I'm absolutely, tunnel visioned on what it is that we could achieve if we get it right.
And do you think you're better now? So I come from a sporting background. There's a phrase that's used a lot about playing free. So you're playing to win, not to not lose. So with what you described there, I would call that, you're playing free now. You're not worrying, you're looking at the art of the possible. Do you think you're better when you're playing free as opposed to when you were?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I used to be worried what people would think about whether I'd got it right, whether I'd got it wrong. I'm not really, I don't think about what people are thinking of me. I'm just so bought into the vision and how to turn that into reality that, yeah, I don't feel, I played squash and things like that. I've done martial arts, and when you're in the flow, that is an equivalent feeling for sure.
Totally agree. That flow state. So our head of people's got a PhD in performance psychology, and he talks about that exact state. I must just have a very specific shout out and thank you to Mark Dixon and family, who are the founders of Auction House, the group. Based on their backing, they've allowed us to always play free. We haven't had to worry, which without that worry, it's given us the freedom to scale and do things that others hadn't before because of that freedom and support. And that's so unique. He doesn't realize how unique it is in terms of what he's given us there, but we're very, very grateful. Thank you.
No, I think that's a key point, and that's actually something I still aspire for the rest of my kind of teams, both in Ecosulis and CreditNature. I think we're doing well at that in CreditNature currently. I think we can definitely embed more of that sense of working in what we're doing in Ecosulis. We've sort of come from a slightly more traditional kind of compliance-led background, very much tied to development historically, and we're trying to move into much more nature restoration, rewilding kind of. Can you give people
a sort of window into the origins of Ecosulis and the sort of time when you came in and what it looks like today?
Yeah, it was a family-run business back in 1990, and I think it was 7 members of the family back then operating in a house. And I joined in 2002 as an ecologist. As I said before, kind of worked my way up, became a senior ecologist, became a technical director, and then became the MD. But through that time, I think Ecosulis was recognised for sort of doing bat surveys, newt surveys, badger surveys, bird surveys, all that kind of stuff. But it also had a very applied background, and it was really unique. It's the first consultancy and contractor in the UK to provide that combination of services. So they would create ponds, they'd do the mitigation work, they'd do tree planting, all of that kind of thing, and have done. That's been part of the heritage of the business right from the beginning. And we're now really proud of that kind of aspect because we've got a really strong root in what it actually takes to create impact as well on the ground. So we're not sitting there just creating these lovely two-dimensional plans.
Genuinely rare.
Yeah.
So many people at the moment want to be a project developer or want to be in natural capital, and you peel below that surface. It's a creme brulee. It's been my analogy today. Absolutely firm surface. You look under it, there's no substance there. It's like, oh no, I have no idea how to do that. It's just.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, we've had failure, but this is one of my kind of arguments around sort of investment in nature and nature credits, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point. But, why do I think this is the right way forward? Well, like I say, we've never had a failed project. Now, that's not because things don't go wrong, but we have worked tirelessly to make it right. And we now know what it takes to deliver over decades. So, ultimately, this stuff is doable, and there are ways to do it impactfully and measure the results, those sorts of things. So, Ecosulis is kind of increasingly pivoting towards that type of work, the project development work, much more nature restoration type of work. Biodiversity assessments, metrics, that sort of thing.
Just before we leave your sort of career trajectory, sometimes I hear from people absolutely rooted in environment, so especially those with an ecology background, they worry as they progress through a business, and I think you described from going sort of from a senior ecologist to a technical director, that type of change. Were you wary of stepping away from the field and moving more into the business side of it? Or were you just excited about the next chapter? Do you remember that journey?
I think I was excited. I think I've always had, and this drives me a little bit, the imposter syndrome. So every job I've had, I've felt like I've been not necessarily worthy of that title. Partly, I think I was always ambitious, so I was always pushing for that next step up anyway. But actually, when I look back at it, I was a pretty proficient botanist. I did a lot of newt surveys. I was a good bat ecologist. I knew I could read the land and those sorts of things. So I probably wasn't doing myself justice. But you know, I don't really miss those moments. I'm really bought into how I'm looking at.
Do you think if people had have interacted you early in each of those steps, they'd have thought you felt that in terms of the imposter syndrome, or would they have just seen a confident exterior?
I think then they would have seen a confident exterior. I think now I'm much more sort of vulnerable and open about it. I don't know. I'm not the best person to speak to about that one. I know someone who's better than I am. So
why do you now feel okay to do that you didn't then?
It's tied to the desire to, I think, utilize my time as effectively as I can to get the most impact. I don't want to waste my time or anyone else's time. So I think it's key for me that I'm getting best bang for the buck. You know, I'm 50 this year, so I need to really use the time that I've got available as productively as possible.
The change was me was adapting from, so at one point doing PhD, competing at powerlifting, playing American football. They're all quite aggressive individual sports where there is a winner and a loser. So when I first entered the working world, I was going to win and I didn't care who lost. And then there's the realization, oh no, actually that's not how the world works. It's better if everybody wins and you succeed by elevating people, not by just beating them. But in that sporting context, you had to win out for your place in the team and you had to beat the person in front of you. And more often than not, when we were playing in the US, they were bigger boys and I was on my bottom for a lot of the time. So you got quite immediate feedback doing that. So I've certainly had that same journey of prepared to in the last 10 years, way acknowledge limitations and failures and challenges. And literally with our recruitment, we've got some recruitment going on site today. We were sat in the office before and the guys came back in and I was overhearing the discussion about whether this candidate was right or not. And one of our relatively recent people went, question is though, what are they better at than we currently do? Which is something I always teach, that, you know, they've got to be better than us in a meaningful way to move it forward. And I wasn't even involved in this discussion and that was happening. I was like, yes, that's what we want.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
No, I think so. And finding people who are better than you is definitely the way that you can all...
Well, it's the reverse. Your business gets worse, doesn't it?
No, well, and it just becomes dependent on you as well, which is not very healthy. So, yeah, I certainly understand that. And that's, you know, that's why I've always enjoyed martial arts, but
what variety?
Oh, a whole range. I mean, I've done that for over 30 years. I did boxing, kickboxing, Tai Chi, Jiu-Jitsu, Krav Maga. I kind of, I've actually stopped now because I had so many injuries.
Shoulders?
Everything. Yeah. So I just do cycling at the moment just to, I literally stopped, probably 6 months ago. And I do regret it, but it's partly because of time. I was quite advanced in Krav Maga. I was training 7 to 10 hours a week, and that was just too much on top of other things.
That comes back to the career thing as well. People see the success and the amazing stuff you're doing with both businesses at the moment. That doesn't leave a lot else. And if you've got to put family in there as well. Yeah. So I sometimes get asked, we were on a site visit. So I said, oh, what's your hobby, Rich? And I was like, this. I do this, lift weights and occasionally speak to my wife and children. But where do you want it to go? There is no, if you want to do something special, you've got to invest your time into it. And chapters of life, right? So that was one chapter and now.
Absolutely, yeah. So I sacrificed that level of sport for making sure I had more time with my family. My eldest has left home. My youngest is leaving for university this year. And my wife and I are planning to do a bit of a digital nomad existence from our 50th year. Exciting. So we'll see how that pans out. I don't know what the future holds necessarily, but that's quite exciting, scary. But yeah, I needed to have more time for the businesses as well because so we're on something.
you absolutely are, and I want to dive into that now. When and why Rewilding?
So back in 2013, it's safe to say, I had serious eco-anxiety.
Just explain what you mean by that to people.
I just didn't think we had a chance. I thought, I'm doing this on a day-to-day basis.
And we're fucked.
I can't see a way through, and I've been close to this for a long time. And then at the time I was watching TED Talks and came across the talk by George Monbiot, and he was introducing his book on feral, and suddenly this whole world of hope just exploded. I watched it back to back 3 times. I was like, why the hell have I never heard of this stuff? And for me, that was just, I mean, that level of hope is still with me like today. And because I understood exactly what he meant, exactly how that was different to the things that we had been doing, exactly how it's quite simple. It's not easy, but it's a simple way of thinking and a simple way of doing. And so it's just a no-brainer for me that's the nature-based climate solution we need to invest in, because if we can do it at scale, everything else follows. So I then kind of reinforced that by visiting kind of rewilding sites around Europe in particular, but now overseas. So I'm more convinced than ever that rewilding is the system and the approach that we should collectively invest in.
Just on that visit, learning, travel point, I think a lot of the stuff we work in is about compromises and contradictions, because the people that chase perfect solutions just don't go anywhere because there aren't any anymore. Do I think a wind turbine on a hill in Scotland is an ideal solution? No, I don't. Do I think it's 100 times better than gas and oil extraction? I absolutely do. When you are traveling to learn and explore those things, how do you reconcile your personal impact of that travel with the learning that comes and then what you can do from it?
Yeah, I think that when I'm traveling to these locations, I try and maximize the value of the input and
that's really important.
Yeah. So the trips that I've done, some of them have been associated with production of articles, for example, published in Geographical magazine or BBC Wildlife. And we use that, I suppose, collateral to educate the market around what's possible and how these projects are developing and how they originated, what it meant for the local community. So there's always quite a strong education kind of component. I think I also reconcile it in the fact that it's really making sure that I know what I'm talking about when I'm saying these things. So again, going back to not wasting time, waste of time can be quite impactful as well if you're exerting your energies in all sorts of ways that don't add to what you're doing. And, you know, as a company, Ecosulis in particular is a B-Corp, so we invest in offsetting our impacts, we invest in people, we invest in the sort of social and environmental aspects of our business all the time. So we try quite hard to balance our overall footprint. So I think I can reconcile it that way. My hope is that through the things that we're doing, that footprint will become insignificant in the long run as well.
Yeah, our General Counsel Auction House, Matt, he talks about, I want my impact to be net positive. If I can make sure that's the way we're doing, I'm comfortable to invest some carbon to save a lot more and to deliver a lot more positive. And I can go with that. I am also guilty of setting aspirational missions and goals with the intent of shooting for the stars, because if you miss, you hit the mountaintops. And you've got a hell of a goal. So a mission to accelerate global rewilding with the aim of rewilding half the planet by 2050. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so quite rightly you say, you know, it's a moonshot, and the idea there is that with a moonshot you have to stretch further to try and achieve that. In fact, we started off by setting the target of rewilding Europe by 2050, and we decided that wasn't big enough because well, there was Rewilding Europe at the time. I set that target before I knew that Rewilding Europe actually existed. So I was a bit disappointed. Obviously not in what they're doing, because they're amazing.
Just pardon me that. I absolutely love that, right? So some people, if they don't see a role model for something, they can't consider themselves to do it. But what you've just articulated there is my mindset too. The absence of someone doing it motivates me.
Yeah.
There's a gap. Great.
Yeah.
So I understand some people want a role model to understand the path. I want the absence of one to go chase it. And that's exactly what you do. When you found out there was one there, slightly disappointed. Right, well, bigger we go.
Yes, it was pretty much that. And but I think, you know, back in the day, I mean, people thought I was absolutely crazy with that idea and probably still do. But I feel quite comfortable with it as something that we need to aspire to. Now, I didn't know what I know now back at that time that I set that.
Do you remember the year or time when that was first said by you?
The first iterations sort of came in around 2015, something like that. I can't remember when we updated to half the planet, a good few years ago now. And what that meant to us is that it forced us to think differently. You know, it's like, okay, we're a tiny little consultancy. What on earth, what right do we have to set that type of goal? But what it does is make you think, okay, if we are going to, what does it take to achieve that? Well, it's going to require some transformation, and it's going to require rethinking the entire architecture of who we are and how we operate. And since then, we're still a small couple of businesses, but since then we've approached people like Dr. Paul Jepson, and he joined us in Ecosulis, set up our innovation team, and helped develop the ideas around CreditNature. Since then, we've pivoted our business much more towards nature restoration and rewilding. Since then, we've written a book on rewilding. We've looked at how technology can be a disruptor and a force for good in that context as well. And we've invested a lot of money into trying to make that all a reality. And so now I look at it and I think, so this is a big hairy goal for sure. But actually since that time, things have changed quite a lot as well. So we've seen the emergence of the Global Biodiversity Framework, for example, ratified by 196 countries in 2022, and explicitly states we want to protect 30% of the land and 30% of the oceans. But it also explicitly states that we want to restore 30%. So now my little goal of rewilding half the planet is overshadowed by global frameworks. We're yet now to work out, well, how do we do that? How the hell are we going to actually turn that into a reality? And that's where I think we've got the opportunity to show how that works in practice. We've got the technologies we've designed and others are working on to enable that at scale. And then when we think about what does it actually mean, how will we recognize that we've actually arrived in this 2050 world where half the planet's rewilded? Now, what we're not talking about is a world that's just full of wolves and bears and bison and everything, as nice as that will be.
Yeah, Chris looks devastated, but it's not going to be.
Well, no, let me qualify that. It's going to take longer to fill the world full of all of those animals, because there just aren't the remnant populations to just immediately expand. There's lots we can do. But what it does mean is that we can move that half the planet, both the land and the sea, from a state of continual degradation to a state of recovery, and we can evidence that, and we can demonstrate that the path that we're now on is a path of rewilding, because by definition rewilding doesn't have a defined endpoint. We are on a path, a trajectory that's up and better, and I think for me that's the world I want to see in 2050. I want us to turn around and recognize that we're not investing 7 times more money into the degradation and damaging of nature, and that is flipped, and that we're investing 7 times more in the restoration of nature than we are into its degradation. And I think that's entirely feasible. I mean, if we actually look at what is required to turn that into reality, the sums of money that are needed aren't that significant on the global scale. Yes, it's less than 1% of global GDP per annum, $700 billion per annum. It's a big number, but not in the scale of things. So I think if we can find a way to guide policy, guide thinking, guide the money into the right places, evidence the impact, that ambition is entirely achievable. So I'm going to give it a go.
Love it.
That's the plan.
We talked about cycling during the break, and it's no different from when Dave Brailsford stood there and said, I'm going to win the Tour de France with a clean British rider in 5 years. He had to completely redesign the systems, the processes, the way you do everything. But by aiming that something was impossible, he could inspire people to think beyond their boxes and where they were in their constraints. And I adore that. So we had a meeting with a partner we were working with recently, and because of the way they needed to structure something, it meant we had to look at one of our estates in a completely different way. And it presented a whole new business model we'd never thought about, because we had a set of new constraints and parameters that had never been put on us. And I'm obsessed about this idea that they said they have to be organic considerations. You can't put them on yourself, because then your brain doesn't work in the same way, I don't think. But if you have a lofty aspiration that's inspirational, it just forces you to create underneath there. It's why we talk about wanting to be the world's first conservation-focused unicorn company. Because if we can build that, the top of that tower, you can create a cathedral of collaboration underneath it where everyone needs to work, and the startups that can come from there. There's a real good chance if you hadn't have voiced that aspiration, so many things wouldn't have happened. OC might not be a thing, because there were lots of forerunners ahead of us that were buying land for conservation. Certainly I read Rewilding when I was thinking about starting the company. So all these things are informing and hopefully building other businesses that come next.
Yeah, and I think that influence is part of the story, really. That's why we wrote the book, and we know it's been disseminated to tens of thousands of people around the world now. Rewilding Europe kindly sort of asked for the illustrated version. We're happy to share that with them so they can disseminate that through their team, and so we're able to have influence. So it's not all on us. It's not just us that's going to make this happen. If it was us on our own, there's no chance. So we have to collaborate. But as far as I'm concerned, that's one of the key tenets of rewilding anyway. It's one of the key principles, is that you want to create spaces where there's opportunity to collaborate.
It has grabbed the psyche of so many people in a way that no other thoughts about the environment has before. There's something about rewilding that has just caught people's attention. What do you think it is?
I think on one level it is quite a simple notion. I think if you get caught up in the headlines, then you can get distracted. But actually, if you take a step back and say, well, what does rewilding actually involve? Well, it involves making sure you engage with people properly, and making sure that you think about the livelihoods and the future of people, and that you integrate that thinking into the reality that we're ecosystem engineers, and that we have the opportunity to be ecosystem engineers for good or bad. Up until now, it's not a great track record, but in the future, we could be collectively the force for good that nature needs, because we're part of nature. And I think people can really connect and resonate to the fact that if you take a step back sometimes, provide some interventions, relatively low cost, enable people to continue their livelihoods or even evolve them, transition to new ways of rural enterprise and nature-based enterprise. Who wouldn't like that? I mean, it's a straightforward, relatively simple mindset. Now, obviously there are challenges in all of that. So it's simple but not easy, and it's about how do you kind of look at the not easy aspects of it to be able to enable it to actually work, and particularly at scale.
Please, in terms of that sort of broad consciousness about people and the environment, how have you seen that change in the UK and beyond in the last decade or so?
Yeah, I mean, we were always seen as a necessary evil, the business that we did. Very few in the sort of circles that we worked in, 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, they just thought we were a pain, really. Why do we have to worry about this nature stuff? Can't we just develop here and build there, or whatever it is? I think since then, we've got the combined climate and biodiversity crisis. I think it's very well understood, documented. The science is pretty rigorous now, and people are actually just seeing it for themselves. They're sensing it for themselves. I think the stories around why it's so important are stronger. The narrative of simple things to understand, like, well, look at your windscreen when you drive around at night. Look at the splats compared to what they used to be. And I think there's also a sort of collective consciousness around our custodianship and our stewardship, our need to sort of be part of a better outcome. At the same time, we've got all of these global shifts in terms of power, social norms and development of cultural perspectives on nature ourselves. And I think people just want something that's better. And so in the context of massive crises in the background and a relatively simple solution put in front of them, I think, there's been a mind shift towards something that's much more hopeful. We're all a little bit tired of the fake news, the bad stories, all the negative that comes out of the news at the moment.
So take us from hope, which I'm so glad we've focused on for quite a while, to the fear paradox. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so I suppose first confession is I'm probably not going to get the book out this year. I've got, as we were talking about earlier, quite a lot on my plate, but it's quite well developed, the fear paradox idea, which is we've got these existential crises that are looming over us, and they are creating this sense of fear and kind of hopelessness and uncertainty about the future. And the paradox is that we do know what the solutions can be, but that elicits fear in people as well at a more local level. So we've got this kind of global sense of fear, and then we've got the opposite kind of local fear, because what we're saying is, well, we need to restore nature, we need to reintroduce large animals, we need carnivores to be flourishing. And so we've got this contrast between the local fear and the global fears, and the task for us is to sort of provide a guiding path through that to say, right, let's not ignore our fears. Some of these are true, some of them are real, but they don't need to define the outcome. We can actually shape the future if we work together, as you were talking about earlier. And we can do that through sharing, understanding, learning, education, investment, all of these things. So I think fear tends to define us. We're hardwired to move to the negative mindset. If we're not careful, it's a good survival instinct. It saves us under duress, but we need to kind of work beyond that and find ways to be able to understand that fear and then move beyond it to better places.
I've seen it play out so many times talking to local communities. So absolutely, we recognise nature's totally depleted here. We need to do a lot about it, but don't change here. I don't want to see that change. I like it as it is.
Yeah.
We absolutely need a different approach to energy, but not here.
Yeah.
That should be elsewhere.
Yes.
It's a really interesting perspective. Where should it be? I don't know, as long as it's not here.
Yeah.
We see that a lot.
Yeah, and that's it's a huge challenge. The way we've been working in ecosystem restoration for a long time. We've had the, not in my backyard kind of conversations for many decades. So again, coming from our quite grounded understanding of how these things work, we know that the first job to do when you want to think about any kind of rewilding, restoration, species reintroduction, whatever it is, you have to have authentic conversations. You have to commit the time. You have to not presume to believe better than the people that are in that location. You need to hear their voice. You need to understand how they've worked the land historically. You need to understand what they're doing now. But probably more than that, you need to listen to their hopes and aspirations for the future and help encourage them to think about a future that they can actually believe in. And what we found is that taking that time to listen, it's authentic listening. It's the key kind of source to these things. Will get a much better outcome than jumping in there and saying, well, we know how to do this, we can solve this problem for you. Because problem solving is all well and good, but that doesn't necessarily get the buy-in of those audiences. And we've seen this with, this is why the R word doesn't get used in certain places, because very well-meaning individuals and organizations went in quite bullishly, telling everyone what they needed to do, probably was the right advice, but the way it was done meant you get off my land, there's no chance you're going to be able to have that conversation for a long time.
We don't tend to talk about rewilding, although I think we're probably going to start more so for that exact reason. So depending on where you are in the country, if you're on Dartmoor, you'll get a stone thrown at you. If you're on Exmoor, you'll get a big hug. You don't know the reception it's going to get. I never want something to be a barrier to an actual conversation if a word gets in the way. But I'm kind of moving past that now to a point of being, so some of the interventions we'll look at here at Monaco and at our estate in Shropshire in Norfolk will be more accurately described as rewilding. And I'm really proud of that, and really proud of the things that are happening there. And I think the movement that you've been a big part of and others is a big reason why we're making some little progress for nature. We need to do our bit to support that, but while still being able to move forward as well. So it is really challenging.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I don't see I don't see the word as a stopper for a good conversations and action.
We just tend to talk about restoring natural processes, which someone has to be really wanting to get offended by that concept. I disagree with natural process. Okay.
Yeah. I just want concrete. I think, we've kind of gone through those transitions, and we've never had a huge amount of kickback, partly because of what I was saying about the engagement side. But I don't really care what you want to call it. From our perspective, everything we do is underlined by rewilding principles. The entire CreditNature system is designed on rewilding science. The metrics measure changes in rewilding outcomes. We don't have to use the word rewilding. We just know that everything we do will feed into an outcome that is recognizable as rewilding.
So you've taken us exactly where I hope. Talk to us about CreditNature and the origins of that business.
Yeah, so that was part of the, I suppose, the need to achieve the vision. How are we going to rewild half the planet by 2050? We need a transformational change. And in order to do that, we need money. And that money needs to be channeled so that the majority of that money hits the ground, doing the things that we actually want to invest in, that we believe will have the impact and the benefits. And at the moment, we know there's too many other ways of getting money onto the ground that actually don't get very much money on the ground. I think I was told once it was something like it was about 18% of the money that was donated through a particular charity actually got to the stuff that people wanted to spend it on. So that sounded like a bad model to me. With Dr. Paul Jepson and the rest of our team, we were kind of looking at different ways to think about this. I've always been interested in blockchain. I've always been interested in technology, actually, because I can see how it's proliferated, the network effect, all of these sorts of things. And we just imagined a completely different system for getting money onto the ground, and also measuring and evidencing the change and the impact that was happening. So we also truly kind of believe that, well, let's design the best system that we think we can, using the technologies that are available today, the methods that are available today, using the latest science that's available today. And our philosophy is that if someone else takes what we're doing and does an extraordinarily better job than we could, then we win. It doesn't matter. I'm not in this to make huge sums of money. It might come, that would be nice, but ultimately it's about provide a way forward that could make these things happen. So, a lot of hard work's gone into the design of CreditNature. We invested in Ecosulis since 2018. We spun CreditNature out as a sister company in just over a year ago.
What was the thinking behind the spin out? What was the timing or the reason why it was important?
I think we recognized that we'd created an entirely different type of business. We built a nature fintech business, a technology-based, financial-oriented business, which is quite different to the sort of consultancy, contracting mindset and approach that we have in Ecosulis. And we also wanted to keep the spirit of entrepreneurialism and innovation alive in that startup. So we felt like we needed to have an independent identity. I think then as things have developed, actually probably post spinning out, we recognize actually it's quite a good thing that Ecosulis is an independent project developer, and that CreditNature isn't tied into Ecosulis. Although the two companies work together, CreditNature will work with any project developer anywhere in the world, and therefore we're not creating a sort of self-contained system that's highly dependent on one or the other. the platform stands on its own 2 feet. And I think that's a better measure of a successful business model anyway, not that you're having to prop up one or the other within the same entity. So I think that from where we are currently, we really recognise that I think it's the right thing to do for CreditNature and for Ecosulis, that they can continue to develop their own identities and spaces, but work collaboratively to get the best outcome.
So you mentioned the interesting technology there and blockchain. Will they spell it out for people in terms of the role technology will play for CreditNature and why we need those technological advancements?
Yeah, so again, with a massive background in biodiversity assessment, monitoring, we've got proprietary tools in Ecosulis that we've used for decades, very technologically oriented, but none of them could necessarily get the same level of accuracy and detail in terms of the assessment, and at the same time scale to different geographies across the world. So we needed to think about how could we get the best of technology, whether it's using satellite data, drones, field surveys, questionnaires, and take that data and convert that into a meaningful set of metrics that can then be connected to financial mechanisms. So in the absence of technology, there are so many failure points that could occur because relying on human surveyors, manual calculations, filing using manual systems, there's just too much that can go wrong with a manual system. So by creating data engines, data lakes, APIs, data feeds, algorithms within the system, we're automating that process so that it's done in a transparent way according to an approved methodology that then ensures integrity all the way through the system. And then we're using distributed ledger technology to provide an immutable record of verification and validation across what we're calling a trust chain. So from the point of collecting data all the way through to the issuance of a nature credit, we can identify the points that are meaningful in terms of maintaining that integrity. And you can't do that without a DLT. It's very much reliant then on humans saying, yes, that was good. Now we're not, the system isn't removing humans from the system. It's just people can come in at critical points to say, yeah, that was done in the way that they said it was, like in the methodology.
More set of tools and techniques to help support people in the process rather than remove them.
Yeah, and also transitioning to new forms of job. We all hear about the rise of AI and things like that. That's true. That will automate certain parts of the process, but in that we're also then enabling the creation of jobs like rangers and people on site who can do ecotourism and people who can create artisan goods and maybe even sort of move to a more subsistence type of existence in the future. And I think that's a positive from my perspective, is let's use technology where it really does enhance or augment what we can do, freeing up people to do the things they really, really want to do.
You've hit the rarefied air of the part 3 reserved for only the most esteemed guests. So the final bit I really want to do is dive into something exciting that hopefully will be flying by the time this is released, but we're going to partner together on our project in Invergeldy. So for people who don't know, 12,000 acre former grouse moor, heavily grazed sheep farm, and we're looking to try and integrate rewilding alongside a renewable energy park there, and also how that can help create carbon credits and nature credits, and we're bringing you guys in to help with that process. So what might that look like for someone who doesn't understand your approach?
Yeah, so we will get involved at a stage where the landowner, the land manager, NGOs and businesses want to perhaps transition to a more nature-based kind of approach, integrating different types of rural and nature-based enterprise. And our team will work with partners, project developers and others to start to work out what's there now. So there'll be a baseline assessment,
We underestimate how important that is.
Yeah.
Without that baseline, nothing's happening from there in terms of a crediting perspective, is it?
No, absolutely, yes. So you need to get the baseline right, and the baseline needs to be speaking to those components of the land asset that you want to recover. And, so you've got to ask some really critical questions at the beginning. Is what do you want to do with this land, and over what time frame, and what are the meaningful metrics that can help you evidence that? So our system measures different components of ecosystem integrity, and we've identified that assemblage of metrics because we know it aligns with the Global Biodiversity Framework, Goal A and Target 2. It also aligns with the emerging science-based targets for nature. And
can you give us some specific examples of the sort of things you'd measure and observe?
Yeah, so under the Ecosystem Integrity Index, we measure 4 dimensions. We're looking at the presence of connectivity, ecological connectivity, and the effect that will have on the dispersal of different types of species. We're also very mindful of the heterogeneity of a landscape, particularly the vegetation, and the way in which those mosaics of vegetation are contributing to the sort of natural structure and disturbance that occurs within the land. So we measure that. We're also looking at the sort of presence of functional species, trophic function, and the effect that has on the food web, because we recognize in rewilding science that trophic cascades, natural disturbance, and the ability for species to disperse are key for restoring ecosystem functions. And then we also have a dimension that looks at the presence of niche and the occupancy of niche as indicated by different guilds of birds species. And we've selected birds because we know birds have been around since the dinosaurs, and there are groups of species that are very characteristic of certain types of habitat function and structure. So, seed-eating birds have particularly adaptations for eating seeds. Wetland birds are typical of the presence of certain wetland features, and so forth. So with that combination of metrics, we combine them using sort of science-based algorithms to create a sort of simplified score, and a score that's comparable between different locations. And then that score is then converted into units of uplift. So when we're measuring from the baseline an uplift in an ecosystem integrity unit, that 1 unit per hectare is what we measure as a nature credit. So that's why going all the way back to the baseline, it's important we have that as a measure so that we can demonstrate that any changes that happen since then are additional to what otherwise would have happened at allocation.
That's amazing. I'm so excited to see how that plays out in reality. And we have to do a second part of this up at Invergildy when you're out on the land with Senior. Those changes have started to happen, and we've started to really understand the relationship between rewilding, the landscape level change, and what that means from a nature credit perspective.
It'll be fantastic. Look forward to that one. Yeah.
Perfect. Cain, thank you so much for coming in. It's been an absolute pleasure. That's us done.
I've loved it. Thanks, Rich. Great to talk to you.